Nice.
Uh-oh.
Good evening, ladies and
Everything is
gentlemen.
still in French.
Welcome to the latest episode of Paranormal Encyclopedia. Unfortunately, my usual co-host Brian McKinley cannot join us tonight because he needs sleep, to be completely honest. But I have a lovely panel of guests that is joining me instead. I am going to start posting links, so I'm going to pick on John since I've had him on more than once and he knows the show. So if John, if you would introduce yourself, while I get links up, and then everyone else can take a turn. And then by the time you guys have all introduced yourself, we should be ready to go.
Good evening, everyone. I am John L. French.
Can you hear me?
I'm a retired crime scene.
I've lost all sound. Oh, that's why I lost all sound.
Okay. Now that Kevin has his sound back, I'm
Yes.
John L. French. I'm a retired crime scene investigator, having done 35 years plus on the streets of Baltimore. I am now a writer, sometime an editor. And I'm here in reference to Danielle Ackley McPhail's and E-Spec's Forgotten Realms series of anthologies, which debut at the annual Telltale Steampunk Convention, which is held in Pikesville, Maryland, every year. This year it is toward the end of March, and I'm sure one of these nice people can give the exact date. So over to you, F.
Oh, to me? I am next.
You.
I am F. Deal. I have been writing since I was 9 years old. And I am one of the victims of John French's editing. As are we all for Ackley McPhail publications there in E-Spec Publications. Currently, I'm writing steampunk. And I'm loving it because my steampunk is set in France, which is just like a second home to me. I love it. I studied there for a year and I've gone back and now I'm just 1842 France is my milieu, and a lot of the stories in those anthologies that I write for those anthologies and for others take place in France, and including the one for our new Kickstarter campaign that will take place in Montmartre, Paris. So you can pick me up there. On to David, I guess.
Okay, my name is David Lee Summers, and by day I'm a mild-mannered writer of steampunk, science fiction, fantasy, horror. My most recent novel is Ordeal of the Scarlet Order, which is a vampire novel set in New Orleans and a few other places and around the Southwest. And of course, have a story coming up in Assembly of Monsters. By night, I operate telescopes at Kitt Peak National Observatory, so I'm an astronomer by trade, and astronomy is one of the big things that pulled me into steampunk because I started my career at an observatory on Nantucket that was using a 19th century telescope with clockwork lined up drives and pulleys and the whole bit. So I would glass plate photographs just like they used at that time, and publishing papers that are still modern, still relevant to the modern era. Using that technology just really inspired me to write steampunks. Onwards.
I'm next in my lineup of people, so I guess I'll go next, at least on my screen. Hello, everyone. My name is Dana Frederick. My pronouns are she and her, and I am a steampunk and fantasy author. If you've read any of my stuff, you probably started either with Out of the Shadows, Falcon's Favor, or Raven's Cry. Those are kind of like where I always tell people like are good places to start. And I have been writing pretty much my entire life. It's something I've always really loved doing, publishing since 2012. And yeah, that's kind of the rundown. And I too have a story in an Assembly of Monsters, and it's very fun and spooky. And honestly, horror's not generally like my wheelhouse. So this was fun to kind of stretch myself. Oh, and on to, I guess, Christine.
Bonsoir. Hotel Christine Norris. I say that because my entire thing is in French. All of my directions are in French. It's talking to me in French. I don't know why, but here we are. I'm Christine Norris. I am a public school librarian during the day. I have been writing fantasy since 2001. 2001. I've been through a variation of publishers, and now most of them live at eSpec. All of the little chickens have come home. I started writing steampunk in 2009, 2009, something like that. And this was the first book, which has now been republished by eSpec. This is the second book that, oops, upside down, that comes out at the end of this month. And these connect to each other, but are not a sequel. They are a series, but not sequential. Yes. And my story in An Assembly of Monsters connects to that universe in its own way for a book I haven't written yet. So I've been writing steampunk for, oh gosh, like 15 years, more or less, in between writing all the other stuff. And now I will end it off with Hildy.
Hi, my name's Hildy Silverman. I am also an author. I write mostly short fiction, horror, fantasy, science fiction, and now steampunk. And I like to cross genres, which is one of the reasons I've been really enjoying writing for these forgotten lore anthologies. I also have a story in Assembly of Monsters. In the past, I was the publisher of a magazine called Space and Time for about 12 and a half years. And I do freelance editing as well for other authors.
Very cool. Yeah, for listeners, if anyone hasn't figured it out yet, this is a continuation of last week with new folks to promote the upcoming An Assembly of Monsters. It is a very cool collection of short stories coming out involving all the fine people you see on screen with me and all the people from last week, except Brian and myself. And I think there's at least one or two more that we didn't manage to snag. Specifically, it's a collection that is set up of characters created by either Mary Shelley or Bram Stoker, which I guess would be my first question is, which character did each of you pick? And give it, if you'd like, give us a elevator pitch, as they call it, for your short story in this collection.
Who starts?
We had parameters. So to make it that the whole book didn't have the same tropes in each story, we all had to be upfront with which ones we needed to pick. So that might be a good, I don't know if you talked about that last week. I picked Mad Scientist. I picked Mad Scientist from Mary Shelley. So mine has to do with a mad scientist. We could just go down the row and tell us what we're. Mine is a mad scientist who is doing things and needs another. He's missing an element. He's missing a technomancer, and so he has kidnapped a young girl, believing that she is the technomancer, which she is not. And this is sort of also a riff on Rumpelstiltskin as well, since it fits into my fairy tale series. So it has that sort of leaning towards it. It's pretty fun. So I don't know if somebody else wants to take what they did.
Yeah, and it wasn't just tropes. It was, these are the stories. She Danielle listed for us the stories by Shelley and stories by Stoker. Pick one, and get your inspiration from that. So I found it difficult because every time I said, "Oh," I picked the lady of the shroud, which is the most bizarre. He did not know what he was trying to write, and it's the dumbest novel I've ever read. Honest to heaven, it is. I mean, he united the Balkans, and everybody's singing "Kumbaya," waving a shroud, and it's weird. But I had this great idea based on one of the characters who kept saying, "I'm the head of the house. I'm the head of the house," and I was just going to make him like a head in an aquarium kind of thing, kind of like you see in City of Lost Children, And Danielle said, "No, we already got something like that." "Oh, okay. All right. Well, how about if I do this?" "No, we already got something like that." So I did end up with the lady, Notre Dame de la Soul, Our Lady of the Shroud, but she ain't quite what she used to be.
I think we've all been through the Danielle, can I do this? For Cry of Hounds, which is, for those of you who don't know, all the stories had to have some kind of Arthur Conan Doyle reference, and a gigantic hound. So being a crime scene investigator, my first request was, can I do Sherlock Holmes? And she said, no, we already have somebody doing Sherlock Holmes. Okay, I'll see what I can come up with. And then the phrase, it was the footprint of a mechanical hound, came to me. So I said, can I do a mechanical hound? No, we already have somebody doing a mechanical hound.
Survey says.
All right. So I'm thinking, what is the largest hound I know? So I said, can I do an Irish wolfhound? And she said, yes. Nobody's doing that yet. I said, fine. Can I blow up an airship? It's steampunk. You got to blow up an airship. And so she said, yes, you can blow up an airship. So that's what I did. For this one, I already had an idea. Basically, since the theme as presented to us was Stoker versus Shelley. No. So I decided to take something from Bram Stoker and something from Shelley. So I have the last descendant of Victor Frankenstein trying to recreate his work. And no, Gene Wilder is not in it. And she's having problems. And into her workroom comes an interruption. Somebody interrupts with an idea on how she can actually manage it. And when she asked him, well, who are you? He simply says, well, call me Vlad. It's not that Vlad, but that's what he's going by. So you kind of know who he is, or what he is. And she figures it out. So there's there's these two people are working together, and because it's steampunk, there's automatons and all that good stuff. And I will say this without giving anything away. When Danielle heard the idea, she liked it. Actually, I sent her about 5 ideas, figuring she liked one of them. And she liked it, but then she made a suggestion. And after the book comes out, or off camera, I'll tell you what it is. But it was an excellent suggestion that sort of tied up, gave me the answer to something else, something that I needed to do, and this showed me the way to do it. So that's basically mine, and it's, like I said, the last. And there is a Sherlock Holmes Easter egg, because why not?
Why not? Of course, John French's elevator pitch is for the tower in Dubai. You understand?
Clearly.
Something else that was very cool about the series is that there had to be an epistolary element in each
Oh,
one.
right.
And so for mine, basically a group of surveyors kind of go into this derelict area. It's set in my Broken Gears world, which is where the rest of my steampunk books are set. And it's an old abandoned carnival, because what's creepier?
Yes.
And things begin to happen, but the epistolary element that I had was a survey report from several years back. And like all of the weird stuff starts to add up, and it was very, very fun to play with.
Oh, nice.
That is a really neat concept.
Thank you.
And they didn't mention last week the epistolary element. I might add.
Oh, yeah.
The thing about the epistolary element, I was just going to say that the thing about it was it's the novel I had just released was entirely told as an epistolary novel, like Bram Stoker's Dracula. And I thought, I'd like to tell this whole story as an epistolary story. And that was one of Danielle's, no, you can't do the entire story. We need to be able to pull the epistolary element out of the story. So my story ends up being a sequel to the story I had in the last story. And so the epistolary element ends up being our heroine, Dinella Stanton, who's a spiritualist, ends up telling the story of how she's gone from where she was there to where she is in the current story. And where I got the idea for the story is it really goes back to the very first vampire movie I really just grabbed onto, which was the 1979 Werner Herzog Nosferatu, which opens up with these scenes of mummies. I don't pull any of the vampire stuff out of it, even though it's Stoker, but it's the mummies at the beginning that really grabbed me. And there are these mummies from Mexico, from the city called Guanajuato. And the more I researched these mummies, the more they really needed to be in a story by themselves. So I had the idea. So Dinella's been involved with the scientist who's been trying to resurrect mummies. So I thought, okay, he's going to go to Mexico now, and he's going to bring her with him, and they're going to try to resurrect the mummies of Guanajuato. But what happens if one of them is an ancient Aztec who actually has time travel abilities, which then ties into Mary Shelley's The Last Man, which was one of the first science fiction novels, first post-apocalyptic novels from Mary Shelley's perspective in the 18th century, looking ahead to the 21st century, where she has plague and battles in the Middle East, and it's amazingly prescient. It's not a monster novel, but it is a fascinating novel to read.
But steampunk.
The epistolary part is, the epistolary part is actually twofold, not just because both novels had epistolary elements, but also that's part of our scavenger hunt for the festival. So that's going to become part of the festival. If you come to the steampunk, which I looked it up, it's March 29th and 30th next year, then you will be able to participate in that and use our parts of our stories to find to follow the scavenger hunt.
Yeah.
Where that comes in.
Hildy has to go.
Yeah. Hi. So I was given I went with Shelley, even though my heart belongs to Stoker, but I do a lot with vampires. I was like, let's be different. So it was inspired by one of her other shorter tales with the ghostly girl, but the actual story deals with the Frankenstein family, or what's left of it. Because at the end of Frankenstein, the only survivor is Ernest, the sort of forgotten brother who's out there.
Yeah.
So this deals with Ernest and his experiments, which are different than Victor's. And the ghostly girl is the very wrongly condemned Justine, who in the book is awfully sanguine about being accused of murdering William, the youngest child, and then sentenced to death. But let's just say that after she's dead, she's a little bit less all right with it. So, yes.
I did like Patrick Thomas and I wrote a novel called Frankenstein Monsters of the Abyss, which was a retelling, and a lot of that was epistolary, where since we wanted to present different points of view, we used letters and journals and things like that. And I was really fascinated with what amounted to the murder of Justine. And being a crime guy, we kind of did something with that, but I figured out who really did it. But but I was really, and I really was comfortable with the epistolatory thing. At first, I was going to use so basically, I just used my main character's journals to kind of give a background and express her frustration, and then there's a journal entry at the end by someone else.
The epistolary nature of the Lady of the Shroud was interesting because the very first entry is written by the hero's, if you want to call him that, cousin, who is upper class twit. He's the one that's always saying, well, I'm the head of the house. But when he appears throughout, even to the point of submitting an article for a travel journal, because he attends the coronation at the end, and and then the next thing is an article in the newspaper apologizing for that article because it is so snotty, and it's like, oh, the people here, and he kisses the mayor's wife like she's some kind of hooker on the street, and it's just it's so hilariously embarrassing. That's why I wanted to write about him. He's a wonderful character.
Kind of characters are fun.
Yeah.
I did want to mention that one of our regulars, Chris Palermo, in the chat said hello and looks and sounds like a fun night, which I would certainly agree with. But I also wanted to take this as an excuse to remind everybody that An Assembly of Monsters is an upcoming book. There is a Kickstarter for it, which the link is in the description. I highly recommend supporting it, and that's not just because it's one of the first 100 backers. I'm getting all sorts of fun extras.
One thing that I don't know if the backers know or the would-be backers know, but one of the things offered in the Kickstarter is the chance to be in one of our stories.
Yeah.
It's called a Tuckerization. And Kevin should know I've Tuckerized him more than once.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you.
But
my pleasure.
So you get a chance to be a character in one of the stories, or if you want to be, if you get in time, you could be a character in all of the stories. It might cost you something, but you could be a character in all the stories. But like, for instance, if you've ever wanted to be a resurrectionist, that is a grave robber, you get my Tuckerization. I will have you stealing bodies from cemeteries.
And doesn't that sound like fun?
Yeah.
Oh yes. So I don't know what else. If I may, Kevin, what else is everybody offering as far as a Kickstarter, a Tuckerization?
Well, I have a Tuckerization, but it's already been bought up by my sister, who always buys my Tuckers.
Oh, very good.
Yes, but also just an hour chat and a critique of your work. If you're a writer, I've been an editor with Abyss and Apex magazine for quite some time, and before that,
Wow.
I was 30 years an English teacher, and I know a bit or two, couple things. Really, I'm actually a pedantic English Oxford comma on my heart editor. So yeah, I can do that.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and I'm offering a Tuckerization. You can come and have a ride on an airship and interact with the characters and find out what's going on. And I kind of keep it a little bit of a surprise. And sometimes I've often known who I'm Tuckerizing, so I often will characterize it a little bit to who I'm doing. But
Yeah, sure.
yeah, I have a lot of fun with Tuckerizing people when people do that. I'm also offering a chat, so if anyone wants to talk writing or wants to talk astronomy or any of the other things that I do, I would be happy to do that.
I don't think I have a Tuckerization in this one. This is my first time in being involved in one of these. I'm sorry, I'm a newbie.
Okay.
But I know one of my other YA books is part of the stretch goals. So
Fantastic.
I think one of mine is too. Honestly, like you've caught me out. I wrote that email months ago. I don't remember what I wrote. I know I did some stuff. Yep, I was. This is the question I was not prepared for. So.
Well, yeah, and we already hit the 3,000 stretch goal. So my book number 3 in my Twins of Belfast steampunk series will be published, and every ARC reader has said it's the best one yet. So I'm very pleased about that.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
It is. I've read it and tore part of it apart, but it is a very good book.
Thank you, John.
So this just makes me think of my co-host who was with us tonight, who has talked about writing me into one of his stories and then jokingly threatened to kill me off by the end of it. I'm like, why is that a bad thing?
Oh yeah. I mean, if anybody would rather be killed off in a horrible manner than being a gravedigger, I'm perfectly willing to do that.
Yeah, the beauty of being a passenger on an airship, that offers all kinds of possibilities for horrible deaths if people want that.
Yeah.
Gee, I can't think of any examples from real life. New Jersey. So I think this made an interesting question last week. I'd like to see different takes on it. But Shelley is, by and large, almost the inventor of the science fiction genre. There's a couple before her. But she's also a key figure in the Gothic horror genre, as of course is Stoker. So, anyone have any thoughts on the similarities of themes between the two authors?
I've read them both. Most recently for Shelley's Frankenstein, because Pat and I were rewriting the book. We thought one of us should at least read it.
Seems logical.
Yeah, but I've really, other than the fact that some of both are epistolatory, there's not really much. I don't really see much of a comparison between the two of them. Different time periods, and whereas Shelley was more science fiction, she sought a scientific reason for her creature. Whereas there is no science. There's really no science in Dracula. There's, at least I don't see any, but it's more supernatural than anything. So I can see where somebody could enjoy Dracula, but not like Frankenstein, and vice versa.
I actually made this little comparison in part of my story because the mad scientist has been studying other writings for his creature, which you don't really learn about to the end. So he starts pulling all these books off the shelf, Victor Frankenstein, and then a mad scientist I have in one of my stories, and then Van Helsing, who wrote the most ridiculous things. But the theme in both of them, to me, is different perspective on living eternally. There's different perspectives on the very nature of life.
Yeah.
And what it means.
Yeah.
That's the connection that I made.
I would agree.
And there's another interesting one that occurs to me is that Shelley, of course, being the daughter of an early women's rights activist, wrote strong women. But Stoker also, because his wife was a suffragette, wrote strong women in his. So for their periods,
badass.
Yeah, but
yeah.
Wilhelmina was badass.
Yeah.
For the time.
Here's the thing: is that when I read Shelley's stories, they have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it's a complete story. And when I read Stoker's other stories, because I was desperate to find something, it's very clear that these were serialized in some way. Because, for example, there's the Lair of the White Worm, Lady of the Shroud. They start out spooky and horror and oh my gosh, is she or is she not a vampire? And what is this woman in the coffin in her shroud? And the next thing you know, there's this war and they're fighting the Turks. And where did they come from? And that's not even the middle. I mean, by the time they get done fighting the Turks, there's then this whole revolution and they're going to unite the Balkan states, and yeah, good luck with that. And it's the craziest political statement, and it has absolutely nothing to do with vampires. The only mystery in the entire novel is that when they're fighting the Turks, their warship has a steel crab that crawls out of the boat, slips underwater, and the next thing you know, this Turkish Indiaman just shakes and everybody on board dies, including the baby bear that was sitting on the cannon. And it never explains what this thing is. It never explains what it did. He had no clue what he was writing. That's my complaint. And I'm reading the Lair of the White Worm, same thing. He got so far and then he got lost writing it. And I think Shelley just had a better idea of how to construct a novel or a story.
Well,
go ahead. I was going to say, I also think it's interesting because both of these books looks at the concept of like, what is a monster, but they take very opposite views as to like how we deal with so-called monsters, where with Dracula, it's a little bit action movie where it's like, oh, we have to go kill this guy. And then with Frankenstein, we're getting his perspective from the other side of it. It's like, please stop trying to kill me. I just want to find peace. And I think that speaks quite loudly as well to just the perspectives that both of these writers were taking as far as who are we listening to.
Very good. Yep.
One thing I did notice on my rereadings of Frankenstein was there is a part where the creature is in the forest and he meets this and he kind of comes across with this family, and there is a long digression which tells the history of this family, which to me really doesn't add all that much to the book. It's sort of like, all right, she must have, speaking in modern terms, she must have been short on her word count and decided to add an extra chapter or two.
It was a Tuckerization. It was a family
Okay.
she knew.
She's suffering from Anne Rice syndrome.
Her Kickstarter, and now she has to include this.
All right. She suffers from Anne Rice syndrome. There's a section in the middle of the Mayfair Witches that goes on for 35 pages about the 13 generations before that brings you. Why did I need to know that? Or the Tolkien complex? I don't know. Like, I don't need to know about the Goblin rebellions of 3,000 years ago. Just get on with it.
Victor Hugo was terrible about it too.
Yes.
And to F's point about
he's three-page sentence. Yeah.
Well, they were
and to F's point
Shelley's
about
wasn't serialized, but maybe she just said, well, that doesn't look thick enough. Let me just add something. I mean, we all do it. I remember my first story that was published was 3,000 words, if that. And now 3,000 words, I'm just getting started.
Yeah, I overwrite a lot and I get yelled at. Danielle and Mike yell at
Oh
me.
yeah, she's what was it? My story for A Cry of Hounds. Danielle liked it, and after we went through all the edits, and boy, Danielle is a very, very good editor, and sometimes I can't see the page from all the little comments she makes. F, you think you've been edited by Danielle too, but she's a very good editor.
Oh yeah.
And once she accepted my story called The Case of the Exploding Airship, which basically tells you all you need to know, she said, it's good, we'll take it, but it's long and we may have to cut it if things run a little too long. And I'm thinking, cut it. What? No, but fortunately, she managed to fit it in there. But I will say,
Because mine was short.
That's good, because I think I
Now
would
you
have
know
probably
why.
went over, and so did Rosenberg.
not too long back at around the time of the last Telltale Steampunk Festival, Mike McPhail asked me about doing a story, science fiction crime story in which the crime scene investigator approaches the scene. Everybody thinks it's one thing, but the crime scene investigator figures out it's something different. So I said, okay, well, I don't know when it's due, but one day I didn't have much, so I figured, let me get started. And I hit 5,000 words. It wasn't done yet. I hit 8,000 words, and it was nowhere near done. I just, I hope Danielle's looking for a novella.
Well, the interesting thing about Stoker and Shelley, and this is before an assembly of monsters was tossed out there, is that in my second novel, Arrows and Arrows, there are a lot, because it's a vampire novel, there's a lot of discussion. One of the first vampire novels, and I'm not, Byron, throw Polidori Byron's out, is Carmilla. And everybody's shaking their heads, so but the characters of Carmilla are the characters in my novel. So Baron Vordenberg is a young man who's following the trail of his great-great-grandfather, who was first discovered Carmilla. But they cat talk about all of the other members of the Order of Van Helsing who get it all wrong, like LeFanu and Coleridge, and then in the third novel that's going to be printed, there's a lot of references to Shelley because they travel through the ether via a supercharged Faraday cage kind of setup. So she discusses a lot about how the essence of life, where does that come from? Does it come from the ether? Does it come from the creator? And so it's funny that, you know, I did all my research on the vampire novels, and then I did all the research on Mary Shelley and Frankenstein and some of her other stories. And then Danielle says, we're going to do Assembly of Monsters, and it's all about Stoker and Shelley. I said, okay.
I wanted to add a couple of things. First, John,
Yes.
I would encourage you to reread Dracula. Because here's the thing. One, if you look at the physical description of Dracula in the book, that's all Victorian science. He's a perfect description of the, what do they call it? The atavistic throwback. The idea of anthropological psychology and the fact you can see somebody is evil because they look like our primitive ancestors. For that matter, when they're trying to find Dracula, mesmerism, hypnosis, which was again, these are largely debunked ideas now, but these were the cutting edge of science when Stoker wrote that novel.
Absolutely.
There's very much a theme in Dracula of science confronting the supernatural. On the other hand, for that matter, Dracula represents an older version of science as well, because the book calls him an alchemist and talks about him conducting experiments. There is a scientific element there that often gets overlooked.
The addition of Dr. John Seward and Van Helsing themselves adds that scientific element to otherwise weird stuff.
In the spring, I actually wrote a paper from one of my English classes where I basically made the argument that Van Helsing is arguably one of the first, if not the first, paranormal investigators to appear in fiction. Because Dracula is a supernatural creature, but he's a scientist who very much approaches vampirism as a rare blood disease, which is his expertise.
Well, references F's newest second novel, second steampunk novel. In Carmela, there is possibly the very first supernatural investigator, the one who goes after Carmela the vampire.
That's Fortenberg.
Fortenberg, yes.
And I can't remember if Carmela's the second English vampire novel or the third. The first is Polidori's The Vampire, and then there's Barney the Vampire and Carmela coming sometime before Dracula.
Yeah. And then there's an American novel called The Black Vampire, which is not really well known, but it's set in the Caribbean and is really a fascinating read. Yeah. Now, and it actually is a reference to the original Polidori version, where it's basically that was published in some editions under the name The White Vampire.
Right.
So the Black Vampire, who was actually an African descended vampire, is partly a play on that. And it was probably written pseudonymously, but it was probably written by, I believe they think it was New York Times authors that were commentators in the newspaper.
Yeah.
And Polidori was not published before Le Fanu. It came after, because he wasn't going to publish it, and then somebody published it with Byron's name, and Byron got really pissed about that. But then it got picked up later. Varney, interestingly, is also the name. When I do research, and I find out who worked where. And one of the people working at the Sharps factory in England in 1840, I think it was a young kid named Sam Varney. And so he's in my third book, and he makes a comment about how, I know it's a name out of the Bloody Dreadfuls, which is what the British called them before they were called Penny Dreadfuls. But it's research rabbit holes are so much fun.
Oh yeah, I'm really surprised nobody's tried to bring Barney back. Grateful, but surprised.
I was going to say grateful.
He's appeared. The vampire's name's appeared at least once or twice.
But Barney ended up getting.
He
sorry,
does
go ahead.
appear in some of what's his name, Kim Newman's novels. Barney does appear as in those, but of course everyone appears in Kim Newman's novels.
Actually, I will confess, in Pat Thomas's and my book, Detectives of the Abyss: Murder at Castle Dracula, I do basically, it's an assembly of vampires, and Varney's one of them. Count Orlok is one of them. I even went so far as to include the Russian vampire, Captain Vampire, who oddly enough was a major in the Russian army.
It's also a really good book, and I'm not just saying this because I got name dropped.
And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that what's interesting is that before Stoker, there was no what do you call it? There were no rules about what was a vampire. When you talk about Carmilla, for example, she was just the governess or the like a lady's maid to these young girls that she would then end up attacking. But I mean, she walked in daylight. The only thing that bothered her was when you sang a hymn near her, she slapped you. She had no special powers. She,
didn't she appear as a cat?
She did, and that was that's one of the things I use in mine. And then you get to who's he what's it? Coleridge, and his vampire is just this very strong, powerful man that just doesn't want anybody else to do anything other than what he commands them to do. And so he's, again, there's none of this, there's no bats, there's no sunlight, I'm going to burn. It's just interesting. And then you get to Dracula, and suddenly all of these rules seem to all come together, and this is what a vampire is. And up until they started sparkling, that was, everybody acknowledged that that's what a vampire was.
And now once again, there really aren't any rules. Everybody creates their own vampire. And I know one of the things in my story, which is called To Feel the Sun Again, Danielle calls me out on what seems to be one of the breakings of the rules. And I just, whenever she does that, I simply plead poetic license. Then I email her
I cite sources.
I actually have, I bought it at a science fiction convention. I actually have a poetic license, which is supposedly signed by William Shakespeare, but I suspect that's a forgery. So I'll just email her the poetic license and say, okay, I can do this. This gives me the permission to do this.
Let me also point out this idea that sunlight burns vampires does not appear anywhere in Dracula.
Not in Stoker's book.
No.
It's implied.
Didn't that come first in Nosferatu?
Nope. He walks in daylight.
Yeah, he does. But it's implied that he needs to, they're at the very end of the book, they're racing for the castle. And I think it's so that he can get back to his sacred grounds, because he's been out of it for too long since he came back. And they're racing across and they get him right outside of the castle. Yes. And I think that's the implication, because I am a subscriber to Dracula Daily. So I read the thing every year in order, which is so fun.
And the implication in the novel is that Dracula is stronger at night, so he has more of his powers and can call on them at night. And in terms of vampire history, Varney the vampire actually required moonlight in order to heal. So he needed to be out at night in order to. If you shot Varney on a new moon night, he wouldn't heal for 2 weeks. You could actually shoot him on the new moon and he would die.
But Varney walked the streets by day. I mean,
he did, yes.
So
he needed the night to. Yeah, he needed the night to heal, but he didn't need to walk during the night.
Exactly.
Yeah. The Garlic King, though, that's in Dracula.
Yes, as is the bats. Which, funny enough,
That's
so
the rats.
but funny enough, what you run into is vampire folklore goes back possibly thousands of years. It's all over
Yeah.
the world,
Yeah.
and there's tons of different variations on it.
Yep.
While bats are traditionally a symbol of evil, they weren't associated with vampires until Stoker. Trivia question for my panel: does anyone know where Stoker got the idea?
South America.
More specifically, there's a specific
fruit
English
bats.
writer.
Oh, sorry. No.
South America, yes, South American vampire bats. And the place that he first heard about
That's what I said.
you said
Fruit bats. Yeah.
No, vampire bats. The ones that
Vampire
actually
bats
drink
are
blood.
fruit bats.
They
They're the
drink
big
blood, not fruit. And they're small. They're small fruit in movies. They use fruit bats because fruit bats are much larger. Actual vampire bats are very small, 6-inch wings.
Oh, okay.
But fun fact: the first time, and we know this from his notes, the first time Stoker heard about vampire bats was a writing of a very controversial English figure, Charles Darwin.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
Darwin mentioned it in his travel logs about encountering them in South America and Mexico, and Stoker got the idea from him.
He called them vampire bats.
I don't know if who originally called them vampire bats, but bats that specifically drink blood.
Okay.
And the
They
stories
usually
that
bite, like
Clint
cows
Morris
and
tells
goats
us
are little.
Yes, mostly cows and goats. They will occasionally feed on humans, but it's more of a starvation thing like most predators.
They also have a compound in their spit that is anticoagulative.
Yes.
Yes.
Fun
They
fact.
just bleed and bleed and bleed for them.
Not supposed to be terribly painful either. I remember reading an account of somebody in Mexico talking to a scientist who studied vampire bats, and the scientist pulls out a picture to show him, and then the guy happens to look down, and there's literally one feeding on his thumb.
Oh, no. Nope. Nope.
Hadn't even realized it. But okay,
That implies they were like sitting in the bat cage during this interview. They're just like just surrounded.
They weren't out. I don't think they were in a lab. I think they were outside. But it is at least supposed to be a true story. I hate to say it, but we're also coming into our last 10 minutes.
Okay.
We can technically
for
go
Kickstarter. Please,
Yes.
get us up there.
look at it already. This is for people who haven't joined the Kickstarter yet. Keep in mind this is fully funded, so this is not. Well, maybe they won't make enough or not. They've made enough, but we're getting more cool things the more people chip into it.
Yep.
And you don't need to chip in a lot to get. I mean, chip in a lot and go be Tuckerized into one of the stories.
Right now, I think we're up to. Let's see. There was the novel for the first days. It's the novel for the first 50 contributors. The first 100 contributors.
We're at 32,
That's been achieved.
64.
There have been 3. They've reached 3 stretch goals. So right now you're up to 5 novels,
Yep.
at least in PDF form. And if you get another 50 contributors, you get my collection of short stories, my out of print collection of short stories, Paradise Denied. And
this, when he talks about contributors, it's
way
like
down there on the stretch goals.
it's only $10 to get all of that.
Yeah.
It's easy. I mean, we talk about Tuckerizations and interviews with us, and those are a little pricier because, I mean, honestly, I get paid more than that for an hour, but the $10 gets you so much, and the more $10 as we have, the more we can bring you.
A lot of people contributing only $10 adds up to quite a lot.
Yes, it does.
And those $10 people get a lot of things for that $10. Like, we've already talked about a lot of the books. There's a lot of things coming up. The more people who hop on get even more stuff. I know I have a short story coming up in one of the future stretch goals, kind of a Frankenstein inspired story I had done, which I think a lot of people will have a lot of fun with. And I'm sure there's a lot of other great things. I've actually read a lot of the stories that are coming up as stretch goals, and I know it's just a great assortment coming in this batch.
Yeah. And
I'll say I'm looking forward to reading all of these stories.
And for those people who like their books in in paper format rather than digital format, the first people who get in there could pretty much get signed copies from as many people as possible. Danielle does something really neat in her anthologies, which is let me see if I find it.
First page, John.
If not, I have it.
A signature sheet.
Can
So
you
we
find
all,
the first
right
page?
after, when the book's available, we all go to F's house and we have a big signing party. So those people who order ahead of time will get several signatures on their books.
And I'm hoping you come, Dana. I want to see you again.
I live in Nashville, Tennessee.
Oh,
But I'll be at the festival. I'm coming to the con.
I
Those
thought
of
you
us
were
who
in
come to the-
Pennsylvania.
No, I live very far away. But
Ah.
I'll go anywhere I can drive. That's why I come to. And although this explains why, like at the convention, I get like piles of these books, and everyone else is already signed, and I'm like, wow, everyone else is like on it, and then here I am, like at my table, just like signing away.
Yeah.
Danielle will haul out the boxes of books for those of us that come from further away, because I come in from New Mexico, so
Oh
it's
my
like,
gosh, you really do live that far away.
So
Yeah.
I remember doing that to you in the first steampunk festival.
Yeah.
Walked over to his table with a big box of books and said, "Here, Danielle wants you to sign these." But for those of you who, I didn't make the last signing party at F's house because I didn't really have any books to sign. But this time, God willing, I will be there. And for those interested, yes, I will bring burger cookies.
It sounds like a really fun time.
Hildy, I hope you're coming too.
I hope so. Well, it depends when it is.
Well, as soon as the books are printed. Sometime in March.
I may have to bring extra burger cookies then.
Yeah, you might. Yeah.
Now I want to go just for the cookies.
Hey, you're
I
welcome.
might have to book an extra trip just to come get, try these out.
She doesn't live that far from me. I'm in Jersey, so
That's yeah. What was that?
somebody's
That's one of Kevin's ghosts.
or possibly.
Oh,
Trust me, it wouldn't be the first time I've had a ghost interfere with it. I haven't had it happen on YouTube, but back in the radio show days, I can tell you some stories. And if you want, I will after we wrap up. I don't want to eat up a little time we have left.
is there an arrows nearby?
So there's a lot of us here. I want to give it, and we're just at the 5-minute mark. It's probably a good time to give each of you a chance to say goodbye. Please feel free to promote, obviously, an Assembly of Monsters, anything else you've got coming out in the near future. I always encourage my guests to talk about the cool things they're doing.
Yeah, well, November 1st is the launch date for Arrows and Arrows, which is my does that show? Oh, no.
Yes,
There we
it does.
go.
For a
There's
second.
Arrows. My vampire novel. Jacqueline throws a huge wedding reception for her sister, inviting all of the notables from Paris. So it features Alexander Dumas, Père and Fils, Charles Baudelaire, Heinrich Heine, the Count de Custine, who was a notable homosexual in Paris, and homosexuality was legal. So this, but it wasn't, it was frowned upon. And the king, Louis Philippe. I did a lot of research into him through his wife's memoirs. So it's a lot of fun, good vampire novel, and I think you'll like it.
Okay.
Fantastic.
Then I'm John L. French. My newest book is When the Devil Drives. It is a collection of my stories that are strange or dark or just plain weird. And several were written for e-spec, some of which actually appeared in anthologies, and some were meant for anthologies which never came to fruition. But it is if you like it dark and you like it weird, When the Devil Drives from Bold Venture Press.
Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Dana Frederick. I have numerous books that I don't have any copies of here at my desk. But Out of the Shadows, Falcon's Favor, and Raven's Cry, like I said, are kind of the 3 starting points. I have a steampunk heist coming out next year, which is very exciting. And if you want to come see me in person, I am going to be at the West Virginia Book Festival next weekend, to the Southern Festival of Books here in Nashville the weekend after. In November, I will be at TeslaCon and the Texas Book Festival. And in December, I will be at Yule Y'all and the Solstice Low Mill Winter Festival, both at Low Mill in Huntsville, Alabama. So wherever you are, come on out.
Oh, I'll jump in. I'm David Lee Summers, and my newest novel is Ordeal of the Scarlet Order, which I've talked about. I haven't really talked about it so far, is Museum of the Omniverse Dragon Exhibit, which is an audio anthology that we have edited. And it's basically got stories by Timothy Zahn. Patrick Thomas is in it. We have Carol Heitschuh and Jeremy Lynch. It also features a dramatization of my very first steampunk story from way back in 2001 about hunting dragons from airships. So that's out on Audible and Amazon. So go check that out. You can get samples, and there are samples at the website museumoftheomniverse.com.
What?
I think Christine's having audio problems.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. You've got a lot of interference, though.
Okay.
You can't understand anything you're saying. I'm very sorry. If you want to type something into the chat.
All right.
There we go.
Here, can you hold up the book again, and then one of us can read it?
Yeah, hold it up for a second.
So, I'm really close to the microphone. It's called A Curse of Time and Vengeance, and that is by Christine Norris.
Yes.
It is a retelling of. It's a retelling of the Sleeping Beauty fairy tale.
Very good.
Steampunk. Yep.
Love it.
Fantastic.
Hildy?
Okay. And I have a couple stories coming out. I guess the ones that are out right now from Eastbeck are Other Ether. I have a story in that.
Yeah, that was so fun.
That was fun. There's stories that are steampunk, but not set in Victorian England. They're set in different areas. Mine's actually set in Hawaii of the 1800s.
Right. That was so good.
There was also Chaos Clock. I have a story in there. And that is horror, cosmic horror with your steampunk, which was a lot of fun. And then I have a couple stories coming out from Crazy 8 Press in anthologies. One is in the Next Thrilling Adventure Yarns that Bob Greenberger edits. That's a pulp science fiction story. And then the third in the Phenomenons anthology series, a story I co-wrote with Russ Colshamiro with characters we've had in the past couple of books. And that's sort of a superhero, but also we have a lot of horror elements in with them.
Phenomenal. Okay, everyone, we're just about at the end of our show for the night. I want to thank everyone for tuning in. Do remember to tune in next week, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Sunday. Brian should be back, and we will be discussing To Be Determined. We've scheduled
that was a great book.
That's a good book.
But please remember to support the Kickstarter, support the books that they've mentioned. This all sounds fascinating. I am grateful that I'm getting so many of these books through this Kickstarter because I only have so much money and there's so many good books. But that'll do it for tonight, everyone. This is Kevin Mears, the Paranormal Encyclopedia, saying thank you all for listening. Have a wonderful night and God bless.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
It's past my bedtime. I'm going to turn into a